Hey Rayleigh, and anybody else watching, and welcome back to another message from your father. Today, Joshua 9 and 10. If you remember yesterday, we were looking at Achan's sin, and because of that, we looked at Israel's defeat. But then after their defeat, and after God judged Achan and his family, we saw Israel's destruction of the city of Ai. I think I'm saying that right, Ai. Today, in 9 and 10, we're going to be looking at the Gibeonite deception. We'll talk briefly about why that's important. The sun standing still. We'll talk about the destruction of the Amorite kings or their judgment. And then finally, the southern cities judged as well. So all of that in 9 and 10. So Joshua 9. Now, when all the kings west of the Jordan heard about these things, those in the hill country, in the western foothills, and along the entire coast of the Great Sea, as far as Lebanon, the kings of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they came together to make war against Joshua and Israel. However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. The men put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant country to make a treaty with us." The men of Israel said to the Hivites, "But perhaps you live near us. How then can we make a treaty with you?" "We are your servants," they said to Joshua. But Joshua asked, "Who are you and where do you come from?" They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. We have heard reports of him, all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all those living in our country said to us, 'Take provisions for your journey, go and meet them, and say to them, "We are your servants, make a treaty with us." This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come see you, but now see how dry and moldy it is. And these wineskins that were filled with new, see how cracked they are, and our clothes and sandals are worn out by our very long journey.' The men of Israel sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. 3 days after they made a treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. So the Israelites set out, and on the third day came to their cities, Gibeon, Kepharath, Beeroth, and Kirjath-jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the assembly had sworn on oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. The whole assembly grumbled against the leaders, but the leaders answered, "We have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, so that wrath will not fall on us for breaking an oath we swore to them." They continued, "Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers for the entire community." So the leader's promise to them was kept. Then Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, "Why did you deceive us by saying we live a long way from you? Well, actually, you live near us. You are now under a curse. You will never cease to serve as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God." They answered Joshua, "Your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and to wipe all its inhabitants from before you. So we feared for our lives because of this, because of you, and that is why we did this. We are now in your hands. Do whatever seems good and right to you." So Joshua saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. That day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the community, and for the altar of the Lord at the place that the Lord would choose, and that is what they are to this day. Chapter 10. Now, Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king what he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a peace treaty with Israel and were living near them. He and his people were very much alarmed at this because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all of its men were good fighters. So Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to Hotham, king of Hebron, Param, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon. "Come up and help me attack Gibeon," he said, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took position against Gibeon and attacked it. The Gibeonites sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings of the hill country have joined forces against us." So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, who defeated them in a great victory at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up from Beth-horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth-horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them from the sky, and more of them died from the hailstones than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. On that day, the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel. Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, "O sun, stand over Gibeon. O moon, over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Jahar. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There's never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a man. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp at Gilgal. Now the 5 kings had fled and hidden in a cave at Makkedah. When Joshua was told that the 5 kings had been found hiding in the cave of Makkedah, he said, "Roll large rocks up to the mouth of the cave and post some of the men there to guard it. But don't stop. Pursue your enemies and attack them from the rear, and don't let them reach their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand." So Joshua and all the Israelites destroyed them completely, almost to a man, but the few who were left reached their fortified cities. The whole army then returned safely to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah, and no one uttered a word against the Israelites. Joshua said, "Open the mouths of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me." So they brought the 5 kings out of the cave, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon. When they had brought these kings to Joshua, he summoned all the men of Israel and said to the army commanders who had come with him, "Come here and put your feet on the necks of these kings." So they came forward and placed their feet on their necks. Joshua said to them, "Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you are going to fight." Then Joshua struck and killed the kings and hung them on 5 trees, and they were left hanging on the trees until evening. At sunset, Joshua gave the order, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had been hiding. At the mouth of the cave, they placed large rocks, which are there to this day. That day, Joshua took Makkedah, and he put the city and its king to the sword, and totally destroyed everyone in it. He left no survivors, and he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the kings of Jericho. Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved on from Makkedah to Libnah and attacked it. The Lord also gave that city and its king into Israel's hand, and the city and everyone in it to Joshua put to the sword. He left no survivors there, and he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved up from Libnah to Lachish. He took positions against it and attacked it. The Lord handed Lachish over to Israel, and Joshua took it on the 2nd day. The city and everyone in it he put to the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. Meanwhile, Horam, king of Gezer, had come up to help Lachish, but Joshua defeated him and his army until no survivors were left. Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved on from Lachish to Eglon. They took up positions against it and attacked it. They captured it that same day and put to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it, just as they had done to Lachish. Then Joshua and all Israel with him went up from Eglon to Hebron and attacked it. They took the city and put it to the sword, together with its king, its villages, and everyone in it. They left no survivors, just as at Eglon they totally destroyed it and everyone in it. Then Joshua and all Israel with him turned around and attacked Debir. They took the city, its kings, and its villages, and put them to the sword. Everyone in it they totally destroyed. They left no survivors. They did to Debir and its king as they had done to Libnah and its king to Hebron. So Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills, and the mountain slopes, together with their kings. He left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. Joshua subdued them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, and from the whole region of Goshen to Gibeon. All these kings and their lands Joshua conquered in one campaign, because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Joshua. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp at Gilgal. So there were a couple things that I wanted to note on there. Number one, the sun standing still. I mean, I think we've talked about God being bigger than matter, right? So God's bigger than the matter he created. God looking to alter time here is almost what it looks like. But if you think about it with matter, and what's the scientific problem of the Earth standing still and the rotation and the orbit around the sun? What's the matter with all of this happening? Well, given how fast the Earth is spinning, and given the tides and everything else, since it says the moon stood still as well, how is this possible? Everything would fly off the face of the Earth and absolute havoc would ensue, right? So you get a lot of people saying, oh, this is absolute nonsense. That's impossible. And yet they forget about the one who created all of this, who created all these systems in place. I mean, that shouldn't surprise us at all that God has the ability to do it. Now, that God did it, yes, that's surprising. That's amazing. God stopped this so that his judgment could be made complete on these people. That's amazing. But it shouldn't surprise us that God can do this, given everything that God's done before. So I thought that was really interesting, because you often hear people say, it's ridiculous. They're not taking into account the God that we serve. The other thing that I thought was interesting is in 9:14. This is talking about the Gibeonite deception. So in 9:14, it says, the men of Israel sampled their provisions and did not inquire of the Lord. So that's the problem with the Gibeonites. Now, God wants all of those people to be judged. He set them up to be judged because of their actions in that land. And in fact, later on, Joshua takes all of those people and judges them just as God has him do, except for the Gibeonites. So what went wrong there? Well, as you just saw, they weren't inquiring of the Lord. And I think that's a danger that's so easy to run. I mean, we get comfortable with this, and I could easily see this with the Israelites getting comfortable with all the success that God has given them, and so they don't inquire of the Lord. So I think that's my prayer for you today, really, is regardless of how bad or how good your day is, or everything that's coming up against you, do not hesitate to inquire of God. Do not hesitate to get into his word, see what God has to say, because there could not be anything more important. Anyway, know that I'm praying for you, that I love you. Anyone else joining, as always, I appreciate you so much. We will plan on seeing you tomorrow. Have a good one.